Welcome, esteemed guests, to Hard Choices Manor. May I take your coats? Very good. And your pants? Very good. Now to tonight's business. I've invited you all here to assist me in solving a mystery. You see, the board game Clue has intrigued players for over 70 years by presenting a cast of dubious characters from every walk of life and asking which ones are capable of killing. The answer, of course, is that they all are. Over decades of special editions and spin-offs and even a cult classic film adaptation, it's become clear that there aren't enough closets in a dozen stately manors to hold all these misanthropes' combined skeletons. The question we have yet to answer about these suspects, the one I submit to all of you tonight, is which ones are capable of fucking? I know, it's very dramatic. Hold on. I'll flip the lights on and off. Tonight we will rank 11 members of the deceased Mr. Body's inner circle, endeavoring to prove beyond any doubt which suspects represent the median, the zenith, and the nadir of fuckability. Up to 3 times this evening, when your logic is particularly airtight, each of you may declare big feels and tell us exactly how you would do it with a particular suspect. Specifying where you would do it and with what implement is optional, but appreciated. After all, tonight's gathering isn't just about making a tidy case against the single most fuckable culprit. It's about all the suspects we sloppily fingered along the way. First, let us introduce ourselves. I am your host, Mr. MeganBob. Joining me at Hard Choices Manor tonight are you, the listener, the decadent voice actor, Mr. Dan Mulkerin.
I don't normally let people into my secret passage on a first date, but I might be willing to make an exception.
The scandalous author, Miss Lillian Carlisle.
I have something to say. I'm not going to wait for MeganBob here to unmask me. I host for Hard Choices, and I'm a bisexual. I feel no personal shame or guilt about this, but actually, never mind, there's nothing after the blood. I feel no personal shame or guilt about anything.
And the notorious credential forger, Reverend Dr. Colonel Kris Newton, DDS.
If Colonel Mustard ever tried to fuck me, he would have flashbacks to the Khyber. Hard pass.
Now that we all know each other, let us read the definition of fuckability as laid out in the will of the late...
Bob? Bob, you cut out, buddy.
Did we lose them?
No, they're on the call. I mean, their camera's still on, but it's dark.
I'm getting some buzzing.
Hold up, I think I can see,
Oh, there it goes. Their picture's back. Ah!
Ah! Oh my god. MeganBob has been murdered. Oh, I'm gonna mute them. I think their head landed on the thunderclap button. That's gonna get annoying.
Did anybody see what happened to them?
No, but they were definitely alone in their room. Look, that cardboard standee of Columbo is still propped up against their door, so nobody could have come in. I know it seems incredible, but there's just no way around it. MeganBob was murdered, and the killer is in this podcast. I'm sorry, I must have unmuted Bob accidentally. I'm gonna boot them from the call. Okay.
So, what do we do now?
I say we keep recording, and nobody leaves this podcast until we know who did it. Agreed?
I guess so, yeah.
Then I guess now is when we define what fuckability is. That's what Bob would have wanted. It's in the script. Who wants to read that?
Lillian, you haven't gotten a chance to read this on Hard Choices before. Do you want to?
Very true, alright. So, fuckability isn't about what they look like, it's about what they fuck like. Assuming you're into them and they're into you, how is the sex, and what is it like?
Amen. Okay, I know emotions are high right now, both for all these fuckable board game characters, and also because one of us killed Bob. But before we get into resolving either of those things, I do think we have to respect the format and do honorable mentions. Is that okay with everybody?
Seems only appropriate.
I mean, we gotta respect the format.
Okay. Deep breath. honorable mentions.
I think the only character I want to honorably mention is the singing telegram singer from the Clue movie.
Excellent.
Got a lot of
Cool.
energy. Natural performer. Had an affair with one of the characters, so she fucks. I don't know. I just I want her spin-off movie. I want the prequel that features her.
I will honorably mention, due to my excessive Clue research for this episode, Monsieur Brunette. The list of iconic Clue characters is very short. Monsieur Brunette is far from it. He first appeared in the Clue VCR game, which is a pretty embarrassing way to start a career, even a career as a murderer. However, Monsieur Brunette has turned up again and again in Clue spin-offs and expansions since then, always as a con artist with a fake French accent, an eye patch, and a certain goofy charm. He's not significant enough for us to put on this list, but he might be the most consistently characterized of all the lesser Clue suspects in the franchise. And anyway, the Hard Choices Charter does demand that we at least give on mic acknowledgement to any character who wears an eye patch, which is the fuckiest of eye accessories.
And then our last honorable mention is Mrs. Ho. The cook from the film adaptation of Clue, Mrs. Ho is thick, brusque, and efficient. She's best remembered for preparing Mrs. Peacock's favorite dish, monkey's brains, but try to look beyond the surface. This isn't about whether you want monkey's brains. This is about the grossest thing that you do want. Is it grosser than monkey brains? No? Then I bet you Mrs. Ho would do that shit. We don't get quite enough of her in the movie to put her on this list, but she definitely made an impression.
With those honorable mentions off the hook, let's open our notebooks and take a long, hard look at our remaining suspects.
Number 1, Mr. Body, aka Dr. Black in the UK. The victim whose murder is the central mystery in almost every version of Clue. Sure, Mr. Body's defining traits are rich and dead, but we're assuming that you fucked him after he got rich and before he got dead. Maybe that's enough for some people.
Number 2, Miss Scarlet, the femme fatale. She's depicted as trading on her sex appeal and guile, whether she's an actress, a madam, a spy, or an undercover journalist. Often a gold digger. Not literally, except that one time in Clue: Yukon Ho.
Number 3, Colonel Mustard, the retired military man who's sometimes dangerous, sometimes a blowhard. Regardless, Colonel Mustard is always some variant of past his prime tough guy, whether that translates to the graying temples of a distinguished gentleman or the overgrown mutton chops of a feral peepums.
Number 4, Mrs. White. Over the course of franchise history, she's been everything from a housekeeper to a chef to Mr. Body's lover. In any case, she's integral to the murder investigation, is the only person alive who knows what Mr. Body was eating behind closed doors.
Number 5, Dr. Orchid, a young botanist and pharmacologist who replaced Mrs. White as a playable character in the 2016 edition of Clue. Thanks to our antiquated legal system, the fact that she has an obvious supervillain name is not admissible in court.
Number 6, Mr. Green. In the UK, he's Reverend Green, a corrupt clergyman, but his character was changed to a businessman in the US to protect American families from inappropriate content in their wholesome murder game. On the other side of the Atlantic, Green is a powerful man who holds a position of public trust, but harbors scandalous secrets.
Number 7, Mrs. Peacock, society matron and prolific widow. She's often depicted as a snob, and sometimes as a love interest for Mr. Body. Once elderly, she seems to have gotten younger in official art since the 1990s, but then a bad husband adds 10 years, and she's probably lost a couple since then.
Number 8, Professor Plum, an unscrupulous academic. Most sources agree that he's an archaeologist, but there's no consensus on his unethical behavior. It's ranged from plagiarism to counterfeiting to inappropriate sexual relationships. Remember the professors you were warned about in college? Plum is all of them.
Number 9, Gray. Gray is one of a number of names that were included in Clue's original patent, but never used consistently. For that reason, while he's usually an inspector or police sergeant, portrayals of Gray have been especially diverse. And yes, I could make a 50 Shades joke here, but I won't. I know Bob was just murdered, but still, let's try to keep it sexy.
Number 10, Yvette, the maid. Her key traits, per the casting call for the 1985 Clue film adaptation, are boobs.
And at number 11, Wadsworth, the butler from the Clue movie. A scathing, sly, yet excitable butler with secrets of his own. And yes, he was memorably played by Tim Curry, but if I'd led with that, you wouldn't have paid attention to the rest. So, Dan, Lillian, listener, that's it for the script. Now I suggest that we watch each other very, very carefully as we rank these suspects. Whichever one of us killed MeganBob might give themselves away with the subtlest clue, like maybe a huge boner for murderers. Let's just adjourn to the study and start things out with our direst accusation, the accusation of being an average fuck.
My median, which is to say my number 6, is Yvette. She is canonically a call girl, so clearly she knows what she's doing. But watching the movie, I didn't really get the sense that, like, she was passionate about much of anything, and, like, certainly not sex. She'll absolutely take care of you physically, but I don't know, I just get the feeling that, like, her head isn't going to be 100% of the game.
I'm next, and my number 6 is Mrs. White. In most portrayals, Mrs. White seems utterly sexless to me. Like, if you look at the first edition, that little scrunched up, beady-eyed housekeeper, that is like trying to rank The Wrench for fuckability. There is nothing there. But there are a few outliers. First, in one or two versions, she's Mr. Body's lover. I feel like you got to have something special to entice somebody like Mr. Body to fuck around with the help long term. Second, obviously, there's Madeline Kahn's version from the Clue movie, which is super foxy, but also not a typical Mrs. White at all. Third, and most importantly, if you look up the box art for the 2023 edition of Clue and turn your attention to the chair in the center, you will find Chef White eye fucking you to death. In a perfect world where those few bright spots were not buried among 7 decades of bland old ladies, Chef White would sit astride this list like she would sit astride me, also in a perfect world. As it is, number 6 is the best I can do. Sorry, Chef.
Hot damn, you are not kidding.
Uh-huh.
Wow. Wowzers. That haircut, though.
We will get to Chef White on my list.
Okay, great. I can't wait.
I thought maybe. Lillian, who's your number 6?
My number 6 is Wadsworth. And I'm doing Wadsworth from the first 2 endings because, spoilers for a depressingly old movie, in the third ending, he's Mr. Body, and we're going to get to Mr. Body later.
Mm-hmm.
And regardless of the ending, it's kind of hard to evaluate him because the whole thing turns out to be an act one way or the other. But we know that he does that whole motor mouthing thing at the end, which has some very tantalizing implications for what he can do with his mouth. He knows how to plan an amazing scene. And he's got that, like, hammy Tim Curry in his prime energy. So I don't know exactly what I'm getting, but I am intrigued, and it's good enough to get him at the median.
Huh. Dan, you're number 7.
So my number 7 is Dr. Orchid. I'm at best, like, a Clue casual. I actually can't remember the last time I played Clue. It certainly wasn't that 2023 version that you just brought up, Kris.
No, you'd remember.
I would definitely have remembered. But so anyway, a couple of these characters I had to, like, do some digging on because I wasn't, immediately familiar with them. And from what I can tell, it seems like in most cases, Dr. Orchid is, basically just like a big old botany nerd who specializes in poisons. And, like, nerds are hot and murderous nerds are hot, but we're not grading on hotness. We're grading on how well we think they fuck. And, looking at her, I don't really think that. Oh, wait, I'm seeing here that she was portrayed as a flapper in one version of Clue. Oh, never mind. Oh. She fucks like crazy.
My number 7 is Mrs. Peacock. My logic here, you can only have so many husbands before you learn a little something about fucking. But when you're a socialite marrying for wealth and status, those may not be good lessons. For example, every description of Mrs. Peacock seems to emphasize that she, quote, maintains her dignity. Which sounds like a C- fuck if I've ever heard one. Lillian, you're number 7.
My number 7 is Mr. Green. So my methodology here, it sounds like it was different from yours, Kris, because it sounds like you're kind of going with the Gestalt, and Dan, I'm not sure what you're going for, but some of these people were so all over the place that I just went ahead and went with the sexiest version of them that I could find. Mm-hmm. And one of the ones who was all over the place is Mr. Green, because it's like sometimes he's a reverend, sometimes he's a mob boss, sometimes he's like a businessman, he's all over the place.
Mm.
And apparently in the 2016 game, he's a Playboy con artist. And, if you're a successful Playboy con artist, then you're gonna be good at what you do. You're gonna be able to, make your mark feel like, the center of the universe. You're gonna be able to wine and dine them. And yeah, it's gonna end badly, because these are all terrible people, but he's gonna be basically competent if he's a successful Playboy con artist. So.
Yeah, I mean, all of these are gonna end badly, It's about what happens before the ending.
Is it worth it ending badly? And with
exactly.
Mr. Green, maybe.
I would have to agree that seems like the sexiest Mr. Green. That is not the way that I ranked them, but I think you found the best one. Dan, you're number 8.
Big feels. Mr. Body. Lillian, you asked a moment ago about what my methodology was for the 7 core characters of Clue, the ones that, appear most frequently across all the different iterations. I decided to go with my favorite version of those characters, which is the versions that appeared in the Clue book series that came out in the 90s, which I read like crazy when I was a kid.
Oh, a Clue casual, are you?
Yeah, well, all right. Maybe I'm grading on a bit of a curve. I don't know Dr. Orchid, but I did read the book, so, you decide where that puts me on the spectrum. So anyway, in this book series, Mr. Reginald Body was a foolishly optimistic and naive billionaire who would throw these expensive parties for his friends, who were the other Clue characters, despite the fact that all of them, on multiple occasions in each book, would try to murder him in order to claim his fortune. And so he came across as this guy who was just incapable of believing anything bad about his friends, no matter how demonstrably true those things were. So I think as a sexual partner, this version of Body goes as far as physically and financially possible to show you a good time. And he has the money to really back that up. But while all of the circumstances surrounding this fuck are luxuriant and decadent, when it comes to the actual physical act of 2 bodies in close intimacy, I think he's too timid to be adventurous. He's too unobservant to notice, what's working for you and what isn't. And he's too worried about offending you or driving you away to adequately communicate his wants and needs. So, big mixed bag for this guy.
My number 8 is Gray. It's really tough to put him this low because I genuinely love Inspector Gray from the mobile game. He's canonically described as noble. He's got this badass coat, like a coat like a noble person would have. It's fantastic. Big beard and I love him. And he's rumored to have had some dirt on Mr. Body before Mr. Body died, and that's why he's a suspect. If that's true and Inspector Gray was blackmailing Mr. Body, that basically makes him the new king of Clue, and I would be obliged to fuck him on that basis alone. Sadly, throughout the rest of the franchise, every effort has been made to portray the various characters named Gray as boring, average-looking, dumbass cops with nothing good about them. So, sadly, just like sexy mobile game Inspector Gray, I have to accept what the preponderance of the evidence tells me, which is that Gray, in general, fucks like the lowest speed on a stand mixer, and he has no idea that it could be otherwise. Lillian, you're number 8.
My number 8's a big feels. And it's Yvette. This is really getting into the premise that it's not what they look like, it's what they fuck like, because Yvette, she's smoking hot. Yeah, you're never going to hear me deny that. But that's really all she has going for her. All her attempts at seduction in the movie are oh, I will stick my boobs in the face. I will lift my skirts so you can see the panties. And that's it. That's as far as her creative will goes. At least her French accent is better than mine. But
it's not that much better than yours.
So there's no sense of anything behind it other than sexy French maid costume that you get at Spirit Halloween. And I think it's going to be a perfectly competent fuck, but I think her big thing is going to be pulling down the top of her French maid costume and going, oui, c'est real. And then when you don't immediately pass out on the spot, then she's done. She doesn't know what to do.
Interesting. Dan, you're number 9.
So my number 9 is Sergeant Gray. This was another character I wasn't familiar with and had to dig into. Wasn't in the books, I don't know what to tell you. it seems like most of the time, as you mentioned, Kris, he's just depicted as like a by-the-books cop on the surface who's like secretly corrupt underneath. And, you know, like skipping the moralizing, judging purely on fuckability, I think that a little corruption goes a long way when it comes to like sexual appeal. Do I think he's going to be good? No, probably not. But he will at least like have an edge. He has like some dark secrets. He's willing to like cut loose a little bit. So, you know, at least there's something there. There's not a lot there, but there's something there.
Okay. My number 9 is Dr. Orchid. I really get no vibe from Dr. Orchid one way or the other. She is just young, serious, and it seems like there's nothing else there. I did figure out why, though. She's only attached to the murder investigation because she is Mr. Body's adopted daughter, which I think is why she seems so neutral compared to the rest of this cast, which is so sexually charged. Mr. Body was a horny dude, exerted a lot of horny gravity, had a lot of horny acquaintances, and he had one daughter who is a very talented botanist. And she probably fucks like a very talented botanist.
Poison Ivy's a very talented botanist, though. So.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah.
Listen, nothing against botanists.
That said, my number 9 is also Dr. Orchid. So I didn't get a whole lot of a vibe from her either. She was hard to rank, but the one thing that I did get was she went to this private boarding school and then got kicked out and was homeschooled. So I think she's an overachieving honor student type. And that means that chances are she will do absolutely anything for a pat on the head and a gold star. And this is a better quality in a sub than in a dom, and like that would be a problem for me because I'm usually a sub. But the thing is, all of my dom instincts tend to be really mean. And I don't like Dr. Orchid because she replaced Mrs. White, so I'm cool being mean to her.
Dan, you're number 10.
So my number 10 is Mr. Green. And in the books, he's depicted as a greedy, bullying capitalist with no moral compass whatsoever. He's not a good lover, not even remotely. But I do think he knows how to party, which is more than I can say for a certain someone below him on this list.
My number 10 is Colonel Mustard. Here's the thing about hard choices. It's not a horniness contest. I mean, for the hosts, yes, low-key, it's a horniness contest. But for the characters on the list, it's a fuckability contest. And that is why Colonel Mustard places at this point on the list, even though I have no doubt that this strapping, leathery, musky motherfucker is ready to bone down just as fast as he can get his suspenders unbuttoned. He obviously used to be the testosterone-fueled alpha type, and I'm sure he's made love at a lot of women, but I cannot imagine that facial hair between anyone's thighs. And I think that's a fucking clue about Colonel Mustard. This guy is a founding member of the Real Men Don't Eat Pussy Club. And anatomy notwithstanding, I just don't think I can have a good time with somebody who has that attitude.
I mean, in fairness, Kris, I don't know a ton of people with vaginas who would want to put mustard down there. So, you know, maybe it's for the best.
The man or the condiment. It's a bad time either way.
Mm-hmm.
I sure as hell don't want to put him down there because he's also my number 10. So we're simpatico on these. And this is definitely a big feels for me. Okay, I'm an army brat. I've got all kinds of feels about this asshole. So no matter what you think about like military types in general, Colonel Mustard is the worst. Because if you're like gonna be all like military is bad, whatever like that, okay, well, not only does he have that in general, but also specifically, most of his stuff lists him as being an alpha male. In some iterations, he's a big game hunter. Like, any negative stereotype you have, he's going along with it. Nothing says anything except misogynistic piece of shit who wants discipline, but not in a fun way. But even if you're like, well, but yeah, military, there's honor, there's protocol, there's being a gentleman. Not with Colonel Mustard, because in every single friggin' iteration, he's a traitor or a coward or a profiteer or some damn thing. So, he's everything bad about dating an army guy with none of the good. He won't make you come to prove his own manliness or gallantry. At the first sign of trouble, he's gonna get his own rocks off and retreat. His name is Colonel Mustard because he is as soft, as yellow, and as seedy as baby shit, and he can stay the hell out of my bed.
Mm.
And that's number 10. Interesting.
Yeah. Look, it's a short list, but it stretches for miles in both directions.
It sure does.
Let's see. I think that's it for number 10. So I think we're on to your number 11, Dan.
Yeah, bottom of the list. And my bottom of the list is Colonel Mustard. In the books, he's a military man with no sense of humor and a short temper who constantly challenges other people to duels. Now, well, I'm sure our dear departed MeganBob would certainly be making heart eyes at the very thought of trying to fuck this cranky man. I have very little faith that there's a good fuck here. Like, very little faith. Faith the size of, I don't know, some kind of very small seed.
I see what you did there.
Mm-hmm.
My number 11 is Mr. Green. It's a close run thing, but just like Colonel Mustard, this is an undeniably horny man who does fuck, but that doesn't necessarily mean he can fuck. Unlike Colonel Mustard, though, Mr. Green doesn't even have that old school bourbon-smelling machismo going for him. Green, like so many grifters who have gone before him in business and in the religion racket, can rely on wealth and influence to get laid. He's never had to do anything else. So, by all means, go get your sweaty, sociopathic millionaire fuck from Mr. Green if your idea of a good time is a rich guy treating you like garbage. Or, just live in the world. Lillian, you're number 11.
My number 11 is Gray. I didn't find the cool incarnations that you guys found. If I had found, Noble Gray and everything, he would have been higher up here. But all I found was that he's a corrupt cop, so, similar deal as Colonel Mustard. But the only personality trait that I could find for him was unimaginative. So, congratulations, Gray. I didn't know the cellar went lower, but you found the secret door.
All right. Damn it. I'm looking over my notes, and I've got some suspicions, but I can't yet prove who the most fuckable Clue character is. Or who killed our good friend MeganBob, which is something else I'd like to find out tonight. I think we're going to have to go through the tops of our lists now and find out what kind of sordid shit we're all into. We've all got skeletons in our closets. And everyone has a boner. Lillian, what kind of boner does your skeleton have?
My skeleton? My number 5 skeleton has a boner for Professor Plum.
Okay.
I was mad on Professor Plum until I got to that ridiculously horny 2023 board game version. Both the cover and his card, because on the card especially, he's got this leer and it's asking you exactly what you'd do to improve your grade. And it's a very good leer. And then on the cover of the board game, especially, he's got this sharpness in his eyes. He's got his fingers all steepled. A lot of the versions are a very absent-minded professor type. This is not an absent-minded professor type. He is studying you. This version's an Egyptologist, and he can excavate me anytime.
Yes, we'll talk about Professor Plum later. We've got some points of agreement. My number 5 is Mr. Body. Mr. Body was involved in every fucking thing, because he's mentioned in the description of every character, basically, in a lot of editions of the game. So we know he's been, dating celebrities, covering up war crimes, funding smuggling operations, running a spy network, everything. He knew a lot of people, and he fucked a lot of people, in every sense of the phrase. What's telling, though, is how many of them became obsessed with him afterward. Not that they all like him. I don't know if you know this, but he did have many enemies. But he got under their skin. He made himself unforgettable. He knew how to strike just the right note to insinuate himself permanently into the lives of not just one, but all of the shady motherfuckers on this list. With that kind of charisma and insight, I guarantee you that Mr. Body is going to know exactly the right move to make himself unforgettable for you, even if that is a move you don't know yet. He just brings out the worst in people, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. Dan, you're number 5.
So my number 5 is Mrs. White. And in the books, Mrs. White is Mr. Body's housekeeper who puts on a polite face in front of guests, only to bitterly sneer and grumble when they're not looking. So in my mind, if she's into you and you play your cards right, it's not going to take much to get her to sublimate all that pent-up frustration into riding you into the prep table in the kitchen. Just try to direct her hands to somewhere on your body where the scratches won't show once you put your clothes back on, because there will be scratches and they will be deep.
Yeah, you're appealing to me here with like the Dorothy Parker vibe. Any encounter you have with someone while you're hating everyone else at the party, that's a good time.
That's not nothing, man.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Lillian, you're number 4.
My number 4 is Mr. Body. I'm going movie Mr. Body here. I mentioned we were going to get back to him. And Kris, I had to take very similar to yours that, yeah, he's going to know what you're into. He's going to really be trying to play into that. But also, he's like Batman with his files on all the members of the Justice League. He's going to have his blackmail file that he's building up on you. And that means that he is going to be encouraging you to do every depraved and decadent thing that you have ever dreamed of. And he's going to be oozing Tim Curry charisma while he does it. I'm here to be corrupted, Mr. Body.
You don't say.
My number 4 is Professor Plum. Call me old-fashioned, but I like it when sex feels weird and dirty. There are definitely sexier and maybe hornier people on this list than Professor Plum, but I defy you to find a weirder, dirtier fuck on this list. Mr. Green might degrade you, but that comes from a place of privilege. It's shameless. It's no fun. Professor Plum is going to bend you over his office desk and fuck you with a statuette of Bast while his actual cat watches and makes you feel superstitious. Professor Plum is going to dress you up like one of his students, tie you to a chair, and make you come while he tells you how disappointed he is in you.
Ooh.
You ever get fucked on top of a mummy? Tremblingly at first, but then with such blasphemous horniness that you're afraid it's going to sit up and send both your asses to Egyptian hell? That is the kind of fuck only a furtive, repressed creep can give you. And you know what? I'll fuck on a mummy one time.
We had an entire episode about it.
Yeah.
Dan, you're number 4.
My number 4 is Mrs. Peacock. In the books, Mrs. Peacock is an older society woman who's obsessed with etiquette and will often chastise other characters for their rudeness. Is that a not-so-secret punishment kink I smell? Oh, Mrs. Peacock, I've been such a naughty boy.
Wow. I mean, we're all courting death here, but geez, Dan.
We knew what we were getting into.
You gotta check references.
Yeah.
Lillian, you're number 3.
My number 3 is Mrs. Peacock. And, okay. So, a Grand Dame in and of itself, I'm not as much into, but this Grand Dame is Mrs. Peacock, whose very name tells you we're dealing with some gender play. The in-your-face nature of the name, the raunchy wink of peacock, the link to, like, ostentatious appearance and dress. I think this is a drag persona. I don't know if she's gonna, like, make me be her little butler or her little maid in her, like, burlesque outfit. Like, I don't know if she's gonna, like, do some kind of burlesque thing where I'm her younger arm candy. I don't know what she's gonna do here. I just know she's going to top with a stiff upper lip and an air of icy polite disapproval, and I am here for it.
That rules. I love that read on her.
God damn. That is like one of the most transformational takes we've ever had on the show. I think that sure. Changes everything.
Thank you. My
number 3 is Wadsworth. And I have no rationale, really. I'm going with my gut on Wadsworth. I had no idea where to place him. But I like that he's playful. I like that he's a little bit mean. He's manipulative and he's very guarded, but he is also... like, there are flashes of exuberance. There's some real stuff that you get from him. There's some real joy. A lot of this is Tim Curry, obviously, but there's just something about being messed with by someone who is a little enigmatic, but then they let you in on the joke. I was once involved, and I believe you were too, Dan, in a conversation about whether it's possible to orgasm sarcastically.
That sounds like the sort of conversation I would have had, yeah.
I didn't know then, and I don't know now, but if anybody can do it, it's Wadsworth, and I think I'd like to see it. Dan, you're number 3.
Big feels? Professor Plum. The book series Professor Plum is not like the one that Lillian so lavishly described from the more recent version of the game. The book series Plum is an absent-minded academic who, despite sometimes losing track of reality, has nevertheless picked up enough advanced degrees to wallpaper the inside of his house. When it counts, he demonstrates an often astonishing display of skill and knowledge on just a huge range of topics. Like at one point in the books, he disarms a bomb. So your initial moments with Plum are going to be frustrating. He'll often just like drift off into these rambling monologues about uninteresting esoterica, kind of forget you're even there. But when you do get his attention and you get his mind on the topic at hand, he'll suddenly like remember this trick he read about in an ancient Sumerian text where you can stimulate multiple pleasure centers at once with the precise application of pressure on the lower abdomen. And then you just lose all sense of time, place, and identity to complete sexual bliss.
I like it.
Part of the magic of this episode is the different interpretations, and I love that we all converged on being into Professor Plum, but for the diverse reasons of like commanding presence, well-read, will fuck you on top of a mummy.
Yeah.
All
absolutely.
just sort of in the mix somewhere.
There's something for everyone. You literally cannot lose.
Let's see, Lillian, you're number 2.
My number 2 is Miss Scarlet. And I had this whole thing prepared about how the 1986 board game art for Miss Scarlet was an early queer crush for me. But then I rewatched the movie and move over, there's another sexiest version of Miss Scarlet. And the thing I love about movie Miss Scarlet is that she's picky. Like, yeah, that's just kind of boobing at everybody. But, you know, Miss Scarlet, she's when Professor Plum's hitting on her, she's kind of shoving him off to the side. If she's into you, she really means it. She's going to put in her best work, and given her professional experience, her best work is going to be friggin' amazing. She's got that twinkle in her eye that tells you that she's going to be playful. She'll be really mean, which I'm usually not into, but I am here. Just, yeah, it's all good.
Yeah. My number 2 is also Miss Scarlet. I think, like, when you think sexy Clue characters, you think Miss Scarlet, and there's a reason for that. If it were just sexy, then it wouldn't mean anything on this list. But she is not just a pretty face. She knows how to work people. She's a very diversely portrayed character, but in almost every iteration of the character, her whole thing is that she knows how to make people feel exactly what she wants them to feel and make them, therefore, do what she wants them to do. And it's scary to be in the hands of a person who can do that, but you can't possibly place it outside the top 3. The only thing holding Scarlet back from the very top is that she's so overt. There's no suspense with her. I think as soon as you're in her sights, once you've been spotted, you both know what's going to happen and who's going to be on top. The only way to beat Miss Scarlet at fuckability is to fuck on more levels. Dan, you're number 2.
My number 2 is also Miss Scarlet. And, you know, I mentioned earlier that, like, Yvette has the skills without the enthusiasm. I think Miss Scarlet is Yvette with enthusiasm. In the book series, and honestly in like pretty much every version of this character, she uses flirtation and her own good looks to manipulate men. You know, she has deliberately made herself as appealing as possible. She knows exactly what to do and to say to get this desired reaction out of you. So, I mean, is she going to be secretive and manipulative during sex? Absolutely she will be. Do I particularly mind being manipulated into coming so hard I run the very real risk of dislocating my pelvis? Absolutely, I do not.
All right, it's time at last to reach inside the envelope. Lillian, you're number 1.
Big feels. So, okay, I went into this, and I was like, I know 2 things going in. I know clearly Miss Scarlet's going to be number 1, and I know that Mrs. White's going to be really close to the bottom of my list because she always looks so joyless. And then, motherfucking Clue 2023 board game. I just melted into this giant puddle of gay. Just like, she's got the butch haircut and like the slouchy, like insouciant posture and just the energy of a woman who gives no fucks at all except for the actual fucks and like has a giant closet full of strap-ons and fingernails that are always immaculately trimmed and filed and just the design was enough to get her to number 2, but then I read her backstory, which is that she's a frustrated chef who wants to do avant-garde things, but Mr. Body is making her do boring hotel food. So she wants to be an artist in a sensual context, and all that frustrated creativity just has to be poured into something, and it's me, Chef White.
I'm looking at this picture again, as I will probably be doing for every day for the rest of my life here on out. She has the energy of like a Japanese Yakuza gangster.
Yes!
Like, just that casual pose, the way she's looking, whew.
She looks like she's from a manga where instead of crime lords beating you up, they make you dinner. Yeah.
Kris, did you ask me to be on this episode just for Chef White?
I didn't know about Chef White when I asked you on, but yeah, it's perfect.
Yeah, I wouldn't have thought you would have been a match for this episode. There's no vampire lords in Clue as far as I know, so.
My number one is Yvette. I even have an explanation written into my script because I knew this would not be a popular choice. If you only watched an hour or even just like 2/3 of the Clue movie, got the gist of the characters, and then wrote your rankings, you would put Yvette in the low to middle tier, like passive eye candy, nothing else going on. You'd be perfectly justified in doing that. But the revelations about Yvette at the end of the movie send her all the way up the list for me. Clearly, she's gorgeous, but that's not the point. The point is the revelation that she is playing dumb and passive, and that's what makes her appearance relevant here. When Yvette blinks innocently at being felt up in her little maid outfit, that's not something being done to her. That's a sex move she's doing. She's using her looks to play the perfectly innocent, perfectly available kind of like sexual prey to a room full of predators. To get real for a minute, I would never consider letting somebody sub like that for me if I had the slightest concern that they were actually dumb or naive, or actually thought they were dumb and naive. But a smart girl who will give you a dumb look for sexy reasons is the hottest thing. Someone who is so obviously your equal that you can fearlessly push them around is everything. And I think Yvette could give that to you. Dan, you're number one.
Big feels. Wadsworth. Versatility and energy. You start the encounter with Wadsworth, the attentive service switch, who gleefully sees to your every immediate need. He then flows into a sexually curious and adventurous partner who's dying to know every one of your turn-ons. We get a brief glimpse of some past grief and loss when he momentarily opens up to us, giving us the chance to comfort him, if only for a few moments, before the two of us run through the manor, visiting and defiling every room at speeds usually reserved for intercontinental missiles. And if, in the end, it turns out he was manipulating me all along, I mean, look, the morality of this situation is for a different podcast to evaluate. I'm here to talk about my boner, and Wadsworth absolutely knows how to treat my boner.
All the clues are in, but there are still a few things that just don't add up. Why doesn't the dining room have any doors facing the kitchen? What condition did we find Mr. Body in that we can't tell if he was killed with a gun or a rope? And are we not going to bother going down that giant staircase in the middle of the mansion to have a look around? Like nobody ever got killed in the basement? There's no other option. It's time to play everyone's second favorite mystery game. Let's unpack that. I'll go first on this. It was interesting. I think your take on Professor Plum was so much about the confidence, the command of the character. And I think that that dovetails with what I was seeing, but goes off in a different direction. Because I feel like he's the guy who, if he could get you to do it, would ask you for the weird shit. But that's like a different kind of thing. And yet, I was definitely imagining the 2023 Professor Plum.
He's the hottest Professor Plum. They're all ridiculous.
Oh, they are. Absolutely. The 2023 characters, they're top to bottom.
Yeah, because with Professor Plum, like, a lot of them had, like, this skeevy and a bad way energy. It was gross, but I don't know. Maybe it's just because he's hot. Maybe I'm just that shallow, but he struck me as skeevy in a good way.
Kris, I'm going to try to avoid getting too Smash Fiction style argument on you when it comes to Yvette. My question for you is, okay, so agreed that, like, you know, in the movie, we learned that she is a lot smarter than she's letting on. You know, she has her own kind of agenda going on. She's playing a lot of these people, that sort of thing. But that's kind of like as far as it goes. And Yvette is not the only person in that movie who's playing everyone else. And in fact, she's one of the people who infamously and lethally gets overplayed herself.
Sure.
Falling into the classic trap of in a house full of murderers walking into a darkened room where she can't clearly see this person and just implicitly trusting them with everything, you know? So I guess what I'm saying is, while yes, I agree with you that she is smarter than she lets on, I don't necessarily know that she's that much smarter, or at the very least, not at a level that puts her above everyone else. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I see that, and I don't necessarily think that she's the smartest character or the most effective manipulator. It's specifically what she would be able to do sexually because of what she is conscious of. And this is actually something that's come up, speaking briefly of vampires earlier. It's come up in the context of planning erotic vampire roleplay. But like, there is something about the later, Lillian. There's something about someone who is self-conscious of being perceived as prey and fully owns that and uses it, but not as like a bait and switch, not as a trap. That is their avatar in the situation. That's their persona. You know, every character in Clue has their stock and trade, and Yvette is the person who is innocent, who is oblivious, and who gives off that thing where you just want to jump on her. That's just a thing I'm into. And the person who gives that off because they want to be pounced, that's a specific special thing. So it's more, I think she has the requisite intelligence to give me that, not that she's the smartest character.
So to expand on that a bit, do you think that that is her preferred like bedroom scenario to set up? Like, you know, she comes to you and is like, hey, I want to do the prey thing again. Like, that's my favorite thing. Or if not that, what do you think, like, if you gave her the reins for the night and you were like, you know what, you tell me what you want to do tonight. Do you think that that's what she would do? Or do you think she might do something else as her like favorite thing?
Depends on the context, obviously. But I think in a situation where she's motivated, you know, she's into you. In a fantasy world, I think she doesn't like negotiate it, but instead she puts herself in an increasingly available position until you gradually begin to think like she must know, she must want me to do something, but she's just so good at playing that innocent that she's like, you know, drawing you in to be aggressive. That's a fun game to play. Again, in real life, you don't want to be dangerous like that, but I think, you know, if there's a version of it that could work in a real life relationship that would be much more, you know, much more worked out and all that stuff. But realistically, in the world of the movie Clue, I think like the fact that she got Mrs. White's husband, I mean, Mrs. White, like that is a sexy ass character. And Yvette not only kind of like played that game against her, but like did it so much that Mrs. White ended up having that great animosity toward her, because I think Yvette just has that thing that you cannot match by being any level of manipulative and like crafty and having all kinds of like artifice of just seeming available and vulnerable.
That is true. She did provoke probably the single greatest monologue in that movie out of just sheer emotional overflow, like as a reaction to her as a character. So, you know, there's something to that.
Yeah.
Dan, I have a question about Wadsworth, because there was a version of my list where I had Wadsworth at number 1, but I think he was just like too opaque for me. What do you think this guy wants?
See, that's interestingly, that doesn't really matter so much to me. With the other, I see,
like a murderer, you mean? Scribble, scribble.
Like a murderer, yes. So, with the other characters, I tried to narrow it down to just one version that I was thinking of. You know, Kris, you, much like you did in the Tarot episode, you know, you were trying to like kind of bring together disparate elements and different interpretations of the characters, trying to like average them out, see where they fall. With me, I tried to just like stick to one version of the characters that I was evaluating. The only character I didn't do that with was Wadsworth, because there are 3 versions of him in his one appearance, right?
Yeah.
When I was making the list, that like stumped me for a bit, but then I really thought about it and I was like, well, if I made these into 2 characters and put them on the list, they would be number 1 and number 2. whatever he's into, whatever it is that he's after, whatever his actual like motivations and agendas are, he's still that guy who is like so energetic. He's so perceptive and attentive, and he attends to your needs when it suits him. He sees through your bullshit when it suits him. He never like drops. He never seems like defeated or out of energy. He's like always moving to the next goal. And it's just like, if this guy has decided that your sexual pleasure is important to him, like that's all you need. It does not matter what other, secrets or agendas he has. It's like, in terms of how good of a time is he going to show you, it's a really good time.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, that's because part of why I ranked him as low as I did was because of the whole not knowing kind of who the underlying Wadsworth is, what his underlying motivation is. But that's a good point, that regardless of what his motivation is, he's still awesome. So.
Yeah, like I can see feeling weird about it if I caught on to the fact that like, if I was like, I don't feel like this guy's being entirely honest with me. But, it's like we've been saying, with this episode, you kind of have to grade on a curve because all of these people are potential murderers.
And therefore extremely hot, yes.
And therefore so hot. But it's like, amongst these murderers whomst we cannot trust, I just think Wadsworth is going to show you the best time,
Yeah. You know what? I think it is the little bit of like, there's so many people here who they're playing it so tight, right? And like understandable, like it's a tense situation. What I love about Wadsworth is like, whatever he's up to, he finds time to make his own fun. And so I think he's the one who, if you got trapped in his schemes, obviously best case scenario is, he's on a secret mission to make you come, right? But like, if that's not if it's just happenstance, he still has it in him to like play with his food a little bit. Actually, that is maybe more appealing to me than the person who is, on a mission from God, is the person who's just like, there are other things going on, and like maybe I'm even here to do something else to or for you, but let me just fuck around with you a little bit first. That feels more authentic to me. And like with Miss Scarlet, for example, I don't think I'd get that. I think there's no wasted motion. I think I would get exactly the fuck she needs to give me to achieve objectives.
Yes, I completely agree. I think you summarized it well. Wadsworth is goal-oriented, but never like loses his sense of play or fun, or his like connection and engagement with the people that he's in the room with. That's not something that's especially common. So I just think that's an asset to look for in a sexual partner.
I have one other question for you, Dan, because your Mr. Body is quite an outlier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Where do you think you would put the classic Mr. Body, who is sort of like the big bad of Clue, who everybody had a reason to want to kill?
Boy, that's a good question. I'm going to have to take a look at my list. So I put Professor Plum at number 3. I think he goes above Professor Plum for sure. Because my version of Professor Plum that I thought of is someone who just so happens to know the best sex thing to do, but you have to like, you have to like jingle the keys in front of his face to like get his attention first. Whereas I feel like Body might not have that ceiling, but like his floor's a lot higher than Professor Plum's. I think, you know what? I'm going to say that version of Mr. Body is probably better than Miss Scarlet because I feel like if Scarlet hates this guy enough to kill him, like she has to also respect him. And I think because he has bested her at her own game, and her game is sex, and therefore I think he's a better fuck. So that's my highly scientific answer. I think more classic non-90s kids book Mr. Body would go in at number 2.
Speaking of the 90s kids book, I know there were a couple different kids book series of Clue. Was this the one where at one point there was a story where Professor Plum built killer robot clones of Miss Peacock? Because I distinctly remember that story.
That would not be at all outside the bounds of the book. I don't remember that story in particular, but I'm like, yeah, sure. You could tell me that happened, and I'd be like, yeah, that makes sense. That's like towards the middle of like the stupid things that happen in those stories. So yeah, absolutely.
My favorite issue of Crisis on Infinite Clues is Robot Peacock versus Drag Queen Peacock.
This isn't so much an unpacking the choices thing, but Kris, I need to hear more about, like, this actual, like, interesting fuckable version of Gray, because I could not find anything. Like, he went below Colonel Mustard. It was bad.
Let me, you know what? I'll look it up right now. I happen to have a search history full of
excellent
obscure clue shit. Okay, so this is him from the mobile game. And it says, so his gimmick is the law. The way these character write-ups work, there are 2 adjectives that are positive with periods, and then 2 with question marks that are like, could he be the bad guy? So his is like noble, powerful, and then question marks, corrupt, vainglorious, which vainglorious is like the sexiest bad thing to be. And then it says, when Dr. Black in this version, because it's a UK-based game, was involved in tax evasion, Inspector Gray pulled all the strings to get the charges dropped, and ever since then, he's been demanding a cut from, Dr. Black. And possibly Dr. Black's refusal to pay up and his threat to report the extortion is why Inspector Gray came after him. So, like, he can either be, like, a legit cop who's on the trail to, like, try to take down, like, solve the crime, or it could be that he intervened in a vulnerable moment and started holding it over Dr. Black. And then when Dr. Black got, too big for his britches, he killed him. And now he's involved in the investigation to cover it up. It's just like he's the secret boss of Clue, which is fantastic. And he's looking over sunglasses. He's just oh man, he's
so
great.
Out of curiosity, which of those 2 versions does it for you more? I guess, do you want him to be a straight and narrow cop who's legitimately investigating a corruption case, or do you want him to be a corrupt cop who's been secretly blackmailing this guy?
I think I want him to be like compromised, but not habitually a dirty cop. I would love it if he was like, we can't get Mr. Body, but instead of, going and drinking at the end of the day and being like, darn it, I wish I could go plant evidence like all the cool cops. Instead, I went to him and was like, hey, guess what? Your problem went away, but I know all about what you did. And so from now on, you work for me because this is like the closest to justice that we can get, and now he's trying to cover his own tracks, but also trying to pursue justice. I want him to be, let's keep those question marks firmly in place.
Sure.
I like this take.
Yeah. Lillian, I have a question for you.
Yes.
You placed Mr. Green highest of all of us. I had him at 10. Kris had him at 11. You had him at 7. So, he didn't quite crack the median for you, but he was still like several places higher than everyone else. What would you say, like, what would be your ideal encounter with Mr. Green? Like, if you could kind of set everything up in the way that worked the best for you.
Yeah, it's tricky because, again, I think the version of Mr. Green that I was going with was different from the version of Mr. Green that everybody else was going with. It was kind of like with you and Mr. Body, where, like, you had the goofy Mr. Body, and I was like, hey, he's basically Sawyer from Lost. Sure, I would fuck the hell out of Sawyer from Lost.
Sure.
So, I guess it would be the sexy encounter would be the kind of, like, if he's being the con artist. Let me think about that for a minute.
Like, does he, like, con you in some way, but then catch his feelings, or, like, what?
I think, that would be that he's conning me, but then, like, he catches the feelings because it was just a con at first, but it wasn't supposed to go this way, and then, like, I find out that he was conning me, and we have this whole big confrontation, but, like, then he's all, like, shows up at my door in tears afterwards, apologizing, and it'll be a whole thing, and then,
oh, wow, so you're envisioning a whole 3-act rom-com with Mr. Green.
I
like it.
What are you doing with a con artist if you're not going to fuck him for all 3 acts?
That's
exactly. True. And then at the end, we go and con somebody else together.
Exactly. It truly is a weird case with Mr. Green because the thing is, like, because Mr. Green has had this, like, bifurcated history throughout the franchise because he had to be a reverend in the UK and he had to be, Mr. Green in America. They're always trying to, like, reconcile the past versions of the character. And the particular version of Mr. Green that you picked is one where they decided that he's a con artist who pretended to be all the things Mr. Green has been in the past. So it is precisely like, this is the version of the character who was only pretending to be all the things that Dan and I hated. So it's very understandable that there's a different ranking there. And I think there is something appealing about, like, the only good thing about Mr. Green is, like, the money and the status. And if you then run into that person and then he's like, oh, but I'm not really that guy, that's That's kind of the best, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, and then if he's pretending to be all these different things, like maybe he is, while being these different guys, he's actually ripping off all of these awful people. Like he's pretending to be a priest, and he's like, ripping off corrupt clergymen. He's pretending to be a mob, and he's actually like running the mob for all they're worth, and just like he could be a crook with a heart of gold. Like
yeah. You meet him and he's like a priest or something, and you find out he's like a really cool priest who's doing good things, but then you find out that he's dirty, but then you find out he actually replaced an actually corrupt priest, and he's a con artist who's been using that position. And then when you find out his secret, now you're on the inside and you're the only one who knows that he doesn't have a real vow of chastity. That's yep.
Now suddenly he's like the one in there who might not be a horrible person.
The idea of trying to reconcile all these different takes under one neat umbrella is like, did like Grant Morrison write that version of Clue? Like, that's so ballsy. I love it.
I was more interested in Clue after this process than Clue deserves, for sure. All right, that was very interesting. I don't feel like we're any closer to solving MeganBob's murder after all that. Although I do feel closer to them in spirit after we talked about fucking that priest. So that's something. We're doing a little better on our other mystery, though. I have deduced the final fuckability rankings.
Hey, before we do that, could we take a quick bathroom break?
Yeah, I could actually go for one of those too.
No, there's a murder to solve.
You are a harsh taskmaster. And not in the fun Professor Plum way.
You need a pass for that.
No, keep going. More discipline.
Let's get it.
Okay, so we've now arrived at the final rankings. They're on the spreadsheet, which everyone has access to. Dan, I'm going to allow you to read the rankings in peace. Our spreadsheet war is behind us. I'm going to stay completely out of this. I learned my lesson from bad choices. So you read this. I'm going to look into this mirror and quietly say affirmations about my spreadsheet, which no one else needs to hear. You do the podcast, Dan.
Okay,
1
deal.
+ 1 + 2 + 1.
So, at number 11, down at the bottom, where he deserves, is Colonel Mustard.
Yes.
In a tie for number 10, we have the combined terribleness of Mr. Green and Inspector Gray. At number 8, we have Dr. Orchid. Number 7 is Mr. Body. At number 6 is Yvette. Number 5 is Mrs. Peacock. We have another tie for 4th place between Mrs. White and Professor Plum. At number 2 is my dear sweet Wadsworth. And in maybe the most shamefully predictable outcome in any Hard Choices episode, our number 1 is Miss Scarlet.
You know what? This may be one for hard data, possibly, because, and I'm doing this from memory, so I don't know, but I believe, now this is the Hard Choices episode with the fewest voting hosts, R.I.P. MeganBob. I believe this is only the second time that a character has won first place without anyone voting them first, and the other time was the Cage episode, which had the most voting participants in a Hard Choices episode.
And what does that tell you? Anything actionable?
I mean, things about myself.
Sure.
Data is its own reward, Dan.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know what? I'm pretty happy with this list. I'm looking at it and accounting for Chef White, I think that she's worth the bump to Mrs. White, who otherwise is, does not deserve number 3. But other than that, this is very solid.
I was like I said, I was expecting to put Mrs. White real close to the bottom, and then I saw Chef White and my panties exploded. So,
And so speaking of solid, that gives us a very solid median of Yvette is smack dab in the middle. Not the most fuckable, not the least fuckable, just in the middle of everyone else. Going unnoticed, perhaps.
That feels right.
I mean, that's where I put
Not
her.
to Kris,
So.
but
Yeah. It just, I mean, look, it depends on, depends on what your tastes are.
Look, man,
she's putting out a certain kind of bait, and it's for me.
We've all been in the position where our number ones ended up in the middle. Like, never forget Black Panther in the MCU episode for me. So
it has happened to all of us.
These things happen,
Okay. Now, I guess all that remains is for us to rate all of the characters from Clue as a whole and see how sexy, let's not say murderers as a class, but these particular murderers are. Who wants to go first? Dan.
I'm going to give this one an 8. These characters are not complicated. They are at most two-dimensional, and one of those dimensions is like potential murder. Mm-hmm. But there is something very compelling about like an archetype of a character with the volume turned all the way up on their shtick. And then if you give them this like kind of potentially dark, secretive side on top of this, I think that's really appealing. A couple of these characters I feel like are would objectively be not great if you pulled them, but they would be interesting. And I also just think that like the majority of this list would like, you might morally regret any intimate time you spent with them, but I don't think you would physically regret it.
Interesting. What about you, Lillian?
I'm going to say a 6 because I feel like it might just be the fact that there's so many iterations of them that it feels like it's harder to have something to hang your hat on. Like, when it lands, it really lands. But then you've got characters like, Dr. Orchid, there's not really much there because she's the evil botanist, that old chestnut. Or like, with Mr. Green, he's got like this one sexy incarnation and then a whole bunch of profoundly unsexy incarnations. And then the one sexy incarnation, it's like, we had to come up with this entire personality for him out of whole cloth. There's not a whole lot there. So I think it almost kind of reminds me of the Tarot episode in some ways, that it's like, this is almost like a series of Rorschach blots in various thematic colors. And you have to do your best with them.
Yeah, you know what? That's persuasive to me. I came into this thinking 8, and I think for the first time ever, I am having to strongly distinguish between the idea of a horny universe and a fuckable universe. Because if I'm looking at like sort of the mean on this list, the characters who are dragging it down in terms of fuckability are definitely horny characters, but I just don't want to fuck them. I don't think anyone should. And so I think for that, I do have to downgrade them. So I'm going to take it down to a 7. It is a hornier universe than that 7 would indicate. But yeah, I wouldn't necessarily recommend that you take all of them up on it. And that takes us to an average of 7, which I think is pretty respectable.
Yeah, not too bad. Not too bad for a kid's board game. Now listen, when we do Hard Choices Candyland, buddy.
I mean, it's not like it's never been considered. You got to come to the meetings, Dan.
Yeah.
So 7. That's the last detail. Everything's wrapped up in a nice, pretty bow. Very convincing. Now, if you'll all join me in the lounge, let's have a friendly discussion about what we learned today.
I guess I learned that sometimes, if you want to know if a character is horny, you just have to ask, well, if they were turned into a board game piece, could they effectively serve as a butt plug? And in the case of the Clue characters, the answer is yes across the board.
I think I learned, like, how powerful kind of having a single image of a character can be. It's kind of like what Claire was saying in the Magic episode with, like, there are all these different versions of the characters, and there's not really one actual version that exists. But if I could find, like, an image of the character that could be the actual character that exists, that was the thing that I was going after. So even, like, when I was looking at Chef White and her incredible hotness, and, kind of say, oh, okay, well, there's that one image of her, but then there's all this other Mrs. White dragging her down, whereas Miss Scarlet is just kind of this amazing composite of hotness across the board. And then I was sort of picturing, like, I was thinking back to MeganBob's Bonerversary bar crawl, and thinking about, well, if I did a Bonerversary bar crawl, and I walked in, and my number one from this episode that I saw waiting for me was Miss Scarlet instead of Chef White, I would not deserve to go home with Chef White. So it's just kind of having that one really sexy image is just kind of so much more powerful than this, like, power of sexy inertia that some of the other characters bring with them.
Yeah.
You compared it earlier to the tarot episode, which is another thought that had occurred to me. It's like, it's really different when you're having to, like, make a decision about what you're including and like what this character, who this character is that you're having an encounter with. You know, that's significantly harder to do when the boundaries are as fuzzy as they are with something like Clue.
Yeah.
I learned something tonight. I learned who murdered MeganBob, and I'm going to tell you exactly how they did it. The mystery in this case was never how MeganBob died. As we all know, MeganBob's soul is a paradox of horny strength and marshmallow softness. I knew that anything could have killed them. Perhaps they had been sternly asked to do the laundry. Perhaps their notoriously delicate tastes had been overtaxed by seeing an ill-fitting suit, or by tasting the wrong flavor of enchilada sauce. The question was motive. Among those of us here in the podcast, whose skin had grown leathery in MeganBob's sunshine? Who would have benefited from extinguishing it? Forever. Someone in this podcast had a motive, and that someone is the killer.
But none of us could have killed MeganBob all the way in New Mexico.
Sorry, Dan, I'm going to mute you right there for being wrong, which God knows is not MeganBob's usual policy for hard choices. But then, their regime is over, isn't it? Their tastes have dictated a lot about hard choices up until now, and not only have those tastes dominated the conversation, they've been contagious. Lillian, for example, was drawn in and empowered in her amoral villain humping by MeganBob's example. I myself have discovered certain predilections thanks to Bob's influence. But MeganBob's pet project? It was you, Dan. And in the inaugural Looney Tunes episode of Bad Choices, you were alone in picking Granny as your number one, revealing to all the world that MeganBob's project was complete. No longer the quietly vanilla voice of normie taste on hard choices. You had become a Werther's baby in search of a Werther's mama. You were a full-on Peepums creeper. And that new kink might have fit you just as cozy as a shawl, but it didn't sit so well with another Hard Choices host, your spouse, Kit Mulkerin. They didn't like the way MeganBob had changed you. They wanted Bob out of the picture, and they wanted you to prove that you'd overcome your nasty case of silver fever once and for all. That's right. What we all thought was just a charming distaste for the elderly on Kit's part turned out to be murderous jealousy. Thanks to Dan's inside information about this podcasting session, Kit was able to conceal their lithe frame in MeganBob's podcast lair, perhaps behind the plinth, supporting that massive black tourmaline phallus. Then, when the time was right, they switched off the lights at an opportune moment to carry out the murder.
But how did they get out afterward? The Columbo standee was leaning against the inside of the door after the murder, and if I know my novelty standees, there's no way Kit could have kept it in that position while leaving the room.
They didn't. What we saw after the lights switched back on was a still image of MeganBob's podcast layer, displayed in the Zoom call by routing it through a virtual webcam on Bob's laptop. An ingenious plot that the murderous Mulkerins could only have executed tonight, when MeganBob's script called for sound effects, and they were more than willing to give Dan or anyone remote control of their desktop to avoid having to learn new audio skills. With Dan at the controls, ready to patch in fake footage to MeganBob's camera, and Kit in the room to switch off the lights and execute the murder, it was the perfect moment for the Mulkerins to get away with murder and to give Colonel Mustard a rock-bottom ranking, thus proving to Kit that Dan had ended the era of cranky old men on hard choices.
Over my dead boner. Speaking of dead, I'm not, so you're not a suspect anymore. You can go, Lillian.
Hooray for not being dead! Thanks for having me on, and thank you for letting me discover the glorious, glorious, gloriousness of 2023 Mrs. White. Wow.
MeganBob.
Yup. That was a pretty good story you just told, Kris. Except for my two pet peeves. There was too much exposition, and the wrong people got fucked at the end. I'm going to do you a favor and rewrite it for you. In fact, I think I'm going to start much earlier. Way back in the tarot episode.
You mean episode 22 back in March?
Why would I know when I did a thing? The important part is what happened. In your stinger at the beginning of the episode, you guessed which of the major arcana would win, and you correctly predicted the Lovers and the Fool, even though a tie for first place had never happened on Hard Choices before.
It made me think, what's more likely? That it was some kind of coincidence, or that a 15th century Italian card game knows the secrets of my future. That was when I decided to take the whole tarot episode into a professional psychic for a pod reading.
Oh, did they tell you something you wanted to hear by chance? Wait, let me guess. You were an international blowjob virtuoso in a previous life.
Bitch, I'm an international blowjob virtuoso in a current life. I don't need a fortune teller to notarize these lips. But I did need a fortune teller to tell me what else the cards in that tarot episode predicted. At the zenith, tied for first place, 2 cards representing the past. The lovers, romantic partners, side by side under the gaze of one angelic being who transcends gender and likes to watch. Obviously Dan and Kit. Both my guests on that episode. The fool, lovable, down for whatever, magnet for cute dogs. Obviously me. At the nadir, number 21, representing the future of the podcast, the Emperor. Beardy, a control freak, a dad. Obviously you. And do you remember what the median was on your list and in the final rankings?
The devil.
Yes, representing the present, the devil. Deceptive, dangerous, rebellious. Someone planning to kill me, and they were sneaking around right under my nose on the podcast. I didn't know who it was, but I bought some protective magical bullshit in the fortune teller shop, so when the attack came, I'd be ready.
Oh, that explains the giant black crystal dick in your room.
Oh no, that is unrelated.
Jesus, Bob. So what did you buy from the fortune teller to make you murder-proof?
Just St. John's wort, but it worked. Back in that episode of Next Wrestling Fan, when you helped me set up my new microphone.
Episode 85.
Back in that unknown episode, you fucking nerd. You sabotaged my mic so that the levels would get messed up whenever my dog Mulder barked, and then short out power in my podcast in when I tried to reset them. You thought I'd die of despair when I saw that I'd have to re-enter my settings in mid-podcast. But guess what? With the non-FDA evaluated power of St. John's wort on my side, I only fainted of despair. By the time I woke up, I'd been booted from the Zoom call and I realized that you had tried to kill me.
Bob, you are being even more ridiculous than usual right now. Why would I try to kill you?
The same reason you do anything. Where the format man just can't get over his precious podcast opinions. We were already planning the next bad choices about Square Enix games with you, me, Dan, and Kit, and you knew that we all wanted it to be shorter than Looney Tunes. But at the end of the last bad choices, you promised the listeners an even longer episode next time because I guess your boner for Chrono Trigger characters is too big to fit in a 4-hour podcast.
I can see that it's pretty big. Go on.
You were so determined to take over bad choices and reshape it into a fleshlight for your thick-ass nostalgia that you took one big swing to get us all out of the way by murdering me and framing them. You were being a real the Emperor, my dude.
Okay, you got me. I'm sorry I tried to kill you.
It's okay. The fortune teller explained it to me. I can't resist walking off a cliff. You can't resist a tidy assassination plot. It's the cosmic balance. Without the Emperor, the fool couldn't even have a cute dog.
Did the fortune teller say that?
I don't know. I was super high. Look, why don't you do the outro this week and we'll call it even?
I bet you wouldn't make James D'Amato do the outro if he tried to kill you.
I would let James D'Amato kill me. That listener base. But you, sir, are no James D'Amato. Do the plugs.
Okay. Go to the Hard Choices Patreon for all kinds of bonus episodes and to see the next Very Drunk Bad Choices episode live. I promise I'll try to squeeze my feelings about SNES RPG characters into under 5 hours. Go listen to MeganBob's other podcast, Garden Plots, where accused murderer Dan Mulkerin plays...
Not a murderer.
You don't know that.
I guess.
Go listen to Garden Plots, where possible murderer Dan Mulkerin plays Skeletor, hosting a gardening podcast. But secretly the show is a hilarious comedy about a supervillain making a podcast, and it's written by past Hard Choices hosts Marissa and Hub, along with MeganBob, so you know it's good. Then go listen to MeganBob's other podcast, the one they co-host with me, The Next Wrestling Fan. It's a watch-along wrestling podcast that has already taught MeganBob all about pro wrestling by following the story of Sami Zayn in 2010's NXT, and can teach you or reteach you to enjoy wrestling too. That's it. Goodbye.
No, you have to say the catchphrase.
Bob, I hate the catchphrase.
I know. That sucks for you. I guess you should have done a better job killing me.
Okay, but I'm going to do my MeganBob impression. Until next time, stay hard.
This has been Hard Choices. If you want to show your support and get even more goofs from behind the scenes, visit patreon.com/hard choices and become a patron. You'll get exclusive voting rights and participation in every weird new thing we do. If you like the show, please consider leaving a 5-star rating and review on the podcatcher of your choice. It shows people what's fun about the show and makes it easier for others to find it too. Hard Choices is produced by MeganBob. Our theme song is Funk Me by Soundroll. This piece and all music used in this production is licensed through Upbeat. You can find details in our show notes and listen to more great tunes at upbeat.io, spelled UPPBEAT.io. The Hard Choices logo is designed by Claire Mulkerin. If you'd like to get into touch with us, look for the Smash Fiction Fan Faction on Facebook and join the conversation. Thank you so much for listening and hanging out with us. You're a peach!